Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is solving a quadratic equation by factoring. It'll be the first one we're going to look at. And so the process is going to be this. You're going to do some things to this quadratic equation. And just remember what a quadratic equation looks like. It looks like this. It has this form. ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It has that form. So notice it's not linear because what's the largest exponent? 2. So it's quadratic. So you're going to solve a quadratic equation differently than you would a linear equation. So you're going to notice the process is different. The idea is different. So one way to solve a quadratic equation is by factoring. But not all quadratic equations are factorable. So remember last semester, if it wasn't factored, what did you put as the answer? No, you don't say no solution. You weren't solving those. You use the word prime. Prime. See, y'all, almost all of you forgot that word. All right, use the word prime. So not all quadratic equations are factorable. And so we saw that when it wasn't factorable, you couldn't factor. You had to use the quadratic formula. All right, so that's what we're going to look at. All right, but the idea about factoring is this. You're going to end up with something that's going to look like this. So you're going to do some stuff, and it's going to look like this. X plus 3 times x minus 1 equal 0. Now, what I have here is in factored form, because you see factors, right? X plus 3 is a factor, just like you did the LCD earlier. And x minus 1 is a factor. And what am I doing to those two factors? What operation am I doing with them? Multiplication. And I want that product to be what number? 0. Well, remember, think about that. If you have two things whose product is 0, then one of them better be what? 0. That's the only way you can get 0, right? One of them better be 0, meaning this. Meaning either this factor is 0 or what? That factor is 0. And so notice I went from this quadratic equation to two what? Linear equations. And so what is the solution for this linear equation? -3. And what's the solution for this one? 1. So those are your solutions. That's the solution to this equation. Now let's see if you remember. You probably don't, but let's see if you remember what property this was. When I said each factor equals 0, what property am I using? Very good, the zero factor property. The zero factor property. And so remember, the zero factor property says this. If you have two or more factors, A times B, if you have two or more factors, A times B, and that product is 0, then one of them better be what? 0. So either A is 0 or what? B is 0. So the idea of factoring is this. You got to factor to where you're going to get a bunch of factors, and you want the product to be what number? 0. You want the other side to be 0, so you can use what property? The zero factor property. That's what you want to use. All right. So let's look at this example. Number 1, so always read the directions, because the directions will sometimes, not always, will sometimes tell you what method to use. So if you look at the worksheets that go with this section, someone will say solve by factoring, someone will say solve by using the quadratic formula, some will say solve by completing the square. Completing the square, all of you probably did not do at all. First one, 4x squared plus x minus 3 equal 0. What kind of equation is this? Quadratic. When you're solving a quadratic equation by factoring, it's got to be in general form. Now your book Last semester, your book called it standard form. This semester, your book calls it general form. General form means this. You want what number on the other side? 0. So this is general form. So I'm going to use the word general because it's in my math lab. General, G-E-N-E-R-A-L, form. So general form means all the terms on one side, zeros on the other. So is this in general form? Yes. Okay. Now we're going to factor. We're going to factor. When factoring, remember, you look for GCF first. What is the GCF of those three terms? 1. Good. All right. So now since it's just 1, I'm just going to go ahead and factor as 2 binomials. It's factorable. If it says solve by factoring, it means it is what? Factorable. So go directly to the 2 binomials. All right. Now remember, that's where you did the reverse FOIL. FOIL. You can use the idea of FOIL. All right, so what you do first is look at F. You want 2 things whose product is 4x squared. You want 2 things. Remember, we're doing F first. First times first. You want 2 things whose product is 4x squared. There are 2 possibilities. 4 times 1 or what? 2 times 2. What do you want to try first? 2 times 2 first, okay? So 2x, 2x. Okay? So that takes care of the F. Now the last, go to the last next. You want the last to be -3, right? Now remember, the last is negative. The last is negative. That means in order for the last term to be negative, one sign has to be positive, the other sign has to be negative, because a positive times a negative is a what? Negative. All right? Now, there's only one possibility for 3. 3 times what? 1. Since these are both 2x's, the same thing, it doesn't matter which part you put the 3 in. Okay? Now, before we determine whether this is positive or this is negative, let's look at the outer and the inner. What's the outer? What's the inner? 6x. Now, the last sign's negative, right? Okay, so that means I'm going to have to subtract these 2 terms, the outer and the inner. When I subtract them, I get what? 4x. Is that the middle term I wanted? No. So that did not work. So 2x and 2x is not the one that's going to work. What's going to work? 4x and x. All right, so let's try 4x and x. Remember, that's that trial and error we did last semester. Trial and error. So let's try 4x and x. So 4x, x. All right, now let's go to the last. I want the last to be -3. Forget about the negative for right now. Let's focus on the 3. What 2 numbers multiplied together is 3? 1 and 3. Okay. Now, you have to put 1 and 3 in the correct spot. So either 1 goes here or 1 goes here. Either 3 goes here or 3 goes here. It's just trial and error. If you put it here, remember what happens. If you put it here and put the 1 here, let's look at the outer and the inner. What's the outer? 12x. What's the inner? X, right? Remember, the last sign's negative, so you're going to subtract these 2. What do you get? 11x. It's not going to work because what you want. You want the middle term to be x. Very good. So that means you're going to have instead 4x and 3, and then x and what? 1. All right. So I know that the order's correct now. The order's correct because why? Look. What's the outer? What's the inner? And when I subtract them, I do get what? 1 what? X. And that's what I wanted. I wanted that x. Now let's focus about the signs now. The larger of these, 3x or 4x, what's larger? 4x. Takes the middle sign. What's my middle sign? Positive. So I need 4x to be positive and 3x to be what now? Negative. That's the only way I can get this to be a positive x. So that means that the 1 has to be what? Positive, and the 3 has to be negative. So you factored. Trial and error. That's what you did last semester. The whole course dealt with factoring. Now, once you factor, notice those two factors, our product is what? 0. What's the next property I have to use? The zero factor property. Now, guys, if it says show all work, I need to see this. Don't be lazy and just write out the answer now. You're going to be very upset. Just take the 15 seconds and write it out. I want to see you know how to use the zero factor property. So you're going to say this. You're going to say 4x minus 3 has to equal what? 0. And then x plus 1 has to equal what? 0. So that what property did I just use? Zero factor property. And now you can do the rest in your head. If 4x minus 3 equals 0, then what does x equal? 3/4. It's fine if you skip that step. I don't care, but I wanted to see this. All right, so make a note. I want to see the zero factor property, okay? So x equal 3/4. And what's this one? -1. There are your solutions. Those are your solutions.
So when trying the factoring, you want us to do it like you did with the trial and error?
Oh, no. You can use whatever method you learned last semester. Okay? Some of you, like Jordan prefers the AC method. Okay? It's up to you. I preferred the trial and error because it's quicker. Now, I did all these. I knew what it was right away. I was just using what some of you were telling me, just because that's what you're going to do. The more you do, the better you get at it, though. All right. Now, just keep in mind, though, that the AC method does take a little bit of time. Okay? It does take a little bit of time, especially when the numbers get a little bit larger. All right. So if the test is timed, you are timed. So that's why it's a good idea to know multiple ways. Okay? That's why last semester we did multiple ways. All right, so that's number 1. Number 2. All right. So if you know the AC method, you can use it, but also you need to know how to use the trial and error because it does come in handy as well.
Are we going to do one on the AC method?
No. I'm not doing the AC method. Okay, number 2. X squared equal 8x minus 15. Okay, so I want to solve this equation. Now, as you go through your course, you're going to have different kinds of equations. So far, you've learned in this course, in just 3 days, you've learned to solve a linear equation, you've learned to solve a rational equation, and now you learn to solve a what? Quadratic. As you go through your course, you're going to learn to solve a radical equation. You learn to solve a rational, a quadratic equation we're doing now, radical, cubic, polynomial, all these kinds. So it helps, though, to know what kind of equation it is the point. If this is quadratic, you know how to solve it. Either by factoring, if it is factoring. If it's not, you're going to use what? Quadratic formula. Okay? All right. Now, what is you got to do first? In that general form. In other words, you got to have one on the other side. What number do you have to have on the other side? 0. Because I need 0 there because I want to use what property? Zero factor property. All right, so you got to bring every term to one side. So let's bring every term to the left. So I'm going to have x squared. What will the rest become? Minus 8x. What else? Plus 15 equal what? 0. All right, and then you factor. You factor. The GCF is 1, so just go directly to 2 binomials. Now, whenever the x squared term has a coefficient of 1, is the easiest kind. This is the easiest kind to factor because what's this coefficient of x squared? It's just the coefficient, though, is 1, right? So the only possibility is x times x. Okay. So remember, you're using the idea of FOIL. Using FOIL to help you go through the process. Using FOIL. because those are two binomials. You're using FOIL. So I got the first, x times x is x squared. Now let's go to the last. Always go to the last next, so that takes care of the f. And let's go to the last. You want two numbers whose product is 15. There's only one possibility, the two possibilities, excuse me. 3, 5, 15, 1. What do you want to try first? 3 and 5. Since these were the same terms, it does not matter where you put the 5 and the 3. Let's put the 5 here, the 3 here. The last sign is positive. You need to know what that means. If the last sign is positive, that means you want these two last terms to have the same sign. Because the only way you can get a positive number is if you have a positive times a positive or a what? Negative times a negative. You know which one it has to be. It has to be this middle sign. So what must both of these be? Negative. And you're done. Now you may want to check, and all you got to do is check the outer inner. What's the outer? Negative 3x. What's the inner? Negative 5x. And when you add them up, what do you get? Negative 8x. All right. So that was your next step. Okay. Now what is it you got to show me? Zero factor property. So what are you going to write? Yep. So remember, the only way you can get two or more product to be 0 is if one of the factors is what? 0. So set each one equal to 0. And so therefore, what's your answer? X equal what? 5 and what? 3. All right, so that's number 2. Okay, number 3. 4x squared equals 8x. 4x squared equals 8x. All right, what are you going to do first?
Bring that 8x on over.
Okay. So, in other words, you got to put it in general form, right?
Right.
So if you're going to do this by factoring, you have to put this in general form. So 4x squared minus 8x equal 0. All right, now, what is the difference between number 3 and the other two? You don't have a c. The other two were trinomials. This is just a binomial. All right? But regardless of what it looks like, the first thing you always have to do is look for a GCF. What is the GCF here? 4x. So you're going to factor out of 4x. So you get 4x times what? X, because 4x times x is what? 4x squared. Remember, always look at what you have. You're dealing with the distributive property here, not the FOIL. You would have FOIL if this was a trinomial. This is not a trinomial. So you can use the idea of the distributive property instead. 4x times x is what? 4x squared. Minus 4x times what is 8x? 2. All right, so that's where we're at. And that's equal to what? 0. All right. So did I factor? Yeah, I factored. Now the next step is what property? Zero factor property. And all you do, guys, is just this. Just set each of these equal to 0. So you're going to say what? 4x equals 0. And then what? X minus 2 equals 0. Now notice in every case, I went from a quadratic equation to what kind of equations? Linear. So let's do this one first. What's x that I'm pointing to? 2. Now this is going to get some of you. What's x over here? 0. Because 4 times what is 0? 0. Now if you didn't see that in your head, then just divide both sides by what? 4. And so x equal 0. Okay. All right. Let's do one more with factoring. Number 4. Number 4. We have this. 3x squared minus 8x equal 16. 3x squared minus 8x equal 16. So we do this by factoring. Is number 4 in the form I need it in? No. Because I have to have what number on the other side? 0. So let's rewrite it. Let's bring all the terms to one side, and let's put in descending order. So you're going to say 3x squared minus 8x. What else? Minus 16 equal 0. All right. Can I factor out anything first? No. So let's go directly, since this is a trinomial, go directly to the two binomials. All right, and that's where you can use the idea of that FOIL to help you. The idea of FOIL, first, outer, inner, last. So let's deal with the F first. What two things gives you 3x squared? There's only one possibility. 3x and x. So let's put the 3x here, the x there. All right, now let's go to the last term that you see. What's the last term that you see? Negative 16. Now remember it's negative, right? So remember what's going to happen is that the middle signs are going to be what? Different. One's going to be plus and the other going to be a subtraction. Because the only way you can get a negative. A positive times a negative is a what? Negative. But I need that to be a 16. There are quite a few possibilities for 16. There's 16 times 1. There is 8 times 2. And there's 4 times 4, right? Which one do you want to try first? 4 and 4? It doesn't always work this way, but usually what happens, you want to try the pair numbers that are closer together than the number line. So 4 and 4 are right under each, or right above each other compared to the other two. All right. So we said 4 and 4, right? Since 4 and 4 are the same number, it doesn't matter where I put the two 4s. No. All right. Now, before I do the signs, let's make sure those are the numbers I need. And here's what we did. We just looked at the outer and the inner. What's the outer? 12x. What's the inner? Since that sign was, last sign was negative, that means I got to do what to these two terms? Add or subtract? Subtract. Do I get 8x? Yes, that's what I wanted. 12 minus 4 is what? 8. Okay, but I need this to be what kind of 8x? Negative. So that means that the order I have is correct. I just got to figure out the sign now. So that means that 12x has to be what? 12x has to be what? Negative, because it's got to be the middle sign. And the 4x has to be positive. So that means that this 4 has to be negative and this 4 has to be positive. All right. Now, what's the next step? The zero factor property. So you said each factor equal to 0. Each factor equal to 0. So what's x over here?
0.
Okay, I guess I got to actually do the work, right? He said it's 0, so I got to do the work. To get x by itself, I got to do what to both sides? Subtract 4. So I get 3x equal what? Negative 4, and then divide by what? 3. So it's not 0, it's what? Negative 4/3. What's x over here? 4. Right, so those are your two solutions. So that's factoring. That's factoring. All right, you just got to practice with this. It really isn't, because you had it last semester, the factoring. You just got to practice. That's all this is dealing with, is just practicing. Okay, now listen carefully to this.